All right, let's talk about something that touches so many families but is so often misunderstood: postpartum depression. It's way more common and honestly way more complex than most people think. So in this explainer, we're going to break down what it is, what it isn't, and why getting this right is just so incredibly important.
So let's just start with a number that might actually surprise you. The CDC says up to 20%, that's 1 out of every 5 new mothers, experiences symptoms of postpartum depression. So right off the bat, we know this isn't some rare fringe condition. It's a major public health issue that's happening all around us.
And that leads to a really big question, probably one you've wondered about yourself. We've all heard of the baby blues, right? But how is that different from actual postpartum depression? Nailing this distinction is pretty much the first and most critical step to knowing when it's time to get help.
Okay, let's dig right into that. Because while the baby blues are definitely a real thing, they are absolutely not the same as postpartum depression, or PPD. And confusing the two can be really dangerous because it causes people to just brush off really serious symptoms as a normal, expected part of having a baby.
The key differences really just boil down to timing and intensity. The baby blues, they're like a quick storm. They show up in that first week, they hit you with some mood swings, and then they're gone. But PPD is a whole different animal. It can creep up weeks or even months after the birth. And if you don't treat it, it can stick around for years, seriously getting in the way of a parent's ability to function and to bond with their baby.
A really helpful way to picture all this is to think of postpartum mood disorders on a spectrum. On one end, you've got the super common and pretty mild baby blues. PPD is sitting there in the middle. And then, way over on the far end, there's a much more severe and, thankfully, much rarer condition. And here's what that spectrum looks like broken down. So you've got the baby blues, with those temporary mood swings. Then there's PPD, and here we're talking about a low mood that just won't quit, crushing fatigue, and this really intense guilt. And then all the way at the end is postpartum psychosis. Now this is extremely rare. We're talking only 1 to 2 cases for every 1,000 deliveries, but its symptoms, things like delusions and hallucinations, mean it is always a medical emergency.
Now, we have to talk about one of the most frightening and honestly most misunderstood symptoms of PPD. People call them scary thoughts or intrusive thoughts, and they are a huge reason why so many new parents suffer in complete silence.
Can you imagine a thought like this popping into your head? It's absolutely terrifying for a new parent. It would make you feel like a monster. But, and please listen to this part, it is a surprisingly common symptom of both postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety.
And here is the absolute most crucial thing to understand. The fact that these thoughts horrify you is actually a good sign. That deep sense of fear and repulsion you feel, that is the exact thing that tells a professional you are not a danger to your child. It is the key difference between PPD and psychosis.
Now, the clinical terms for this are ego-dystonic and ego-syntonic. With PPD, those scary thoughts are ego-dystonic, which just means they feel totally alien, they don't align with who you are, you're horrified by them. In psychosis, on the other hand, the thoughts are ego-syntonic. They feel real, they make sense, they feel true to the person having them. And that is what makes that condition so incredibly dangerous.
So, why do people suffer in silence with this? Well, the reasons are just overwhelming, aren't they? The fear of being judged, of being seen as a bad parent, and the ultimate fear that someone might take your child away. All of that just creates this massive, powerful wall of shame. But it's so important to hear this. You are not the only one, not by a long shot.
And the impact of untreated PPD, well, it doesn't just stop with the person who's suffering. It creates this huge ripple effect that touches the entire family, especially that new baby. And the consequences can last for years and years.
You can really see how those ripples spread out over time. In infancy, a parent's depression can make it hard to form a secure attachment. Then, during the toddler years, that can bubble up as behavioral problems. And by the time a child gets to school, research has actually linked untreated maternal PPD to a higher risk for ADHD and even lower IQ scores. It's a significant adverse childhood experience.
And it is so critical to know that this isn't just about the person who gave birth. Partners can and absolutely do experience postpartum depression too. When you think about it, the sleep deprivation, the stress, the crushing weight of new responsibilities, it's a perfect storm that can trigger a depressive episode in any new parent.
Okay, I know that was a lot of heavy stuff. So let's pivot and talk about the most important part of this entire conversation: hope and healing. because postpartum depression is absolutely 100% treatable. There are clear, effective ways to get better.
A really great starting point is the simple framework called the Nest S method. It's an easy way to remember the basics: nutrition, exercise, sleep, time for yourself, and support. Now, just tending to these pillars is essential, but let's be real. We all know it can feel completely impossible in those early days of parenthood.
And that's why self-care, on its own, often isn't enough. Professional help is absolutely key, and that can look like a few different things. It starts with getting screened by your doctor. It can mean therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a real game changer for PPD. It could include medication, and many of them are perfectly safe to take while breastfeeding. And finally, never ever underestimate the power of peer support. Just connecting with other parents who actually get it. I want to leave you with this really powerful way of looking at it from a therapist who works with this all the time. Your fear isn't a sign that you're a bad parent. It is proof, absolute proof, of how deeply you love your child and want to keep them safe. Your brain might be playing tricks on you, but your heart is in exactly the right place.
And that kind of brings us to a final question for all of us. Now that we know this, how do we help break the stigma? It really starts with sharing information just like this. It's checking in on the new parents in our lives. It's just normalizing the conversation. Because that's how we build a world where a new parent asking for help isn't seen as a sign of weakness, but as the ultimate act of love for their family.